The first time I held a positive pregnancy test in my hands, I was 17 years old. My boyfriend at the time, a boy named Michael with hair that fell into his eyes and a laugh that made my stomach flutter, had held me while I cried. We were scared. So terribly scared. But there was a thread of wonder in it too. A secret we shared that felt almost sacred. My mother had looked at me with such disappointment. Such weary, heavy disappointment. And then she had done what mothers do. She had sighed. She had lectured. She had held me while I cried again. And then she had helped me. She had taken me to the clinic, held my hand in the cold, sterile room, and brought me home to a bed she'd made up with fresh sheets and a hot water bottle. She had made me soup. She had stroked my hair and told me, "You'll be okay, baby. We all make mistakes. This doesn't define you." That was the shape of a mother's love. A fortress I had taken for granted, never imagining it could one day be dismantled, brick by brick, with me still inside. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that my mother was not a monster. She was not a cold woman, not an unloving one. That's what makes the rest of it so impossible to reconcile. Like trying to fit a jagged piece of glass into a puzzle made of silk. It just doesn't fit. It cuts. 23 years later, I found myself staring at another positive pregnancy test. My hands, however, were not the hands of a 17-year-old. They were the hands of a 40-year-old woman, with veins a little more prominent. A wedding ring I'd taken off 2 years ago, leaving a pale, ghostly band on my finger, and nails bitten down to the quick. There was no boyfriend this time, no fluttering laugh to anchor me. The father of this child was a man named Richard, and the most defining, catastrophic fact about Richard was that he was my mother's new husband. I sat on the edge of the cold porcelain bathtub in the small, rented bungalow that had become my divorced woman's purgatory, the plastic stick trembling in my grip. The 2 pink lines weren't just lines, they were a brand. They seared themselves into my vision, and I knew, with a chilling, bone-deep certainty, that my life as I knew it was over. But I didn't yet understand the particular, exquisite cruelty of how it would end. I didn't yet know that the fortress, built by the woman who had once made me soup, would become the instrument of my total eviction, not just from a house, but from the very concept of family. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end, a time that already felt like walking through the ruins of my own life. My divorce from David had been finalized just over a year ago. We'd been high school sweethearts, a love story I'd believed was written in the stars. But it turns out it was written in sand, washed away by years of quiet resentment and the deafening silence of a marriage where 2 people had become ghosts to each other. He was a good man, David, a stable man. He was a CPA whose idea of excitement was a new spreadsheet formula. I had been a vibrant, artistic girl, full of dreams of painting murals on city walls and living a life of colorful chaos. Somewhere along the way, between the mortgage payments and the parent-teacher conferences for our son, Liam, I had grayed myself down to match his palette. I had become the supporting actress in the movie of David's very orderly life. And the credits were rolling. The day I moved out of our 4-bedroom colonial, the house I had made a home with my own hands, painting every wall a careful shade of greige, I felt a grief so heavy it was like a physical weight on my chest. Liam was 15 then, all long limbs and sullen silences, caught in the crossfire of our polite, devastating uncoupling. He chose to stay with David. It was a practical decision, we all said. The school was better in that district. His friends were there. The house had the big backyard with the basketball hoop. It was a knife to my heart, but I told myself it was a clean cut. For his own good. I saw him on weekends, and every time he left my sad little bungalow, a piece of my soul went with him. I'd watch his retreating back, his shoulders already broader than I remembered, and I'd close the door and slide down it, weeping on the linoleum floor until I had nothing left. I was a mother without a child, a ship without a mooring. I was 40 years old, and I was adrift. In that vast, echoing emptiness, my own mother stepped in. Or maybe I should say, she expanded. After my father died 7 years ago, my mother, Brenda, had a period of deep gray mourning. I'd worried she would calcify into a permanent state of widowhood, a beautiful, fragile bird in a too large house. But then, a year ago, she had shocked us all. She met Richard at a charity gala for the local animal shelter. She was 62, A woman who still did her hair and makeup every day, who believed in the power of a good moisturizer and a crisp white blouse. She had the energy of a woman 2 decades younger, a fact she attributed to pilots and a refusal to eat gluten. Richard was 55, a consultant of some vaguely defined sort who exuded a slick, backslapping charm I found instantly cloying. He had a full head of silver hair, teeth so perfectly white they looked like chiclets, and a laugh that was just a little too loud, a little too practiced. He was the polar opposite of my quiet, intellectual father, and I couldn't understand the appeal. But my mother was besotted. She giggled like a schoolgirl around him. She bought new, tighter clothes. She declared to anyone who would listen, reinvented. I tried to be happy for her. I really did. I pasted on a smile for the engagement party. I helped her pick out a mother of the bride, but the bride is the mother, dressed for the small, elegant wedding. I stood in the garden of her beautiful, sprawling home, the home I had grown up in, and watched her exchange vows with this man. A diamond tennis bracelet glittering on her wrist, a gift from him. I felt a strange, nauseating swirl of emotions. A childish jealousy, maybe, that she had found a second act while my own life had crumbled to ash. A protective, daughterly skepticism of this slick stranger, and a deep aching loneliness as I stood alone. The divorced daughter, the secondary character in this tableau of renewed love. It was my mother, ironically, who first encouraged Richard to be a friend to me. "You two should get lunch," she'd say, patting my hand. "You're both at a loose end now that the wedding is over. He's so good at making people feel better. He just has this way about him." And he did. That was the insidious thing. He had a way of making you feel seen, while I was drowning in the invisibility of my own life, where my ex-husband looked right through me and my son only communicated in monosyllabic grunts. Richard looked at me like I was fascinating. It started with a phone call, just to check in, he said, to see how his new favorite stepdaughter was doing. He'd call when he knew my mother was at her book club or her pilot's class. His voice was a warm, honeyed balm on the raw wound of my solitude. He asked about my art, something no one had done in years. He wanted to see my old portfolio. He came over one afternoon, this man who was technically my stepfather, and sat on my threadbare sofa, leafing through my paintings from college with a reverence that made my throat tight. "You're a real artist, Claire," he'd said, his eyes holding mine for a beat too long. "It's a crime you've let this go. A beautiful, passionate woman like you, living in this gray little box. You deserve more. You deserve color." No one had called me a beautiful, passionate woman in a decade. To my ex-husband, I was a collection of household management tasks. To my son, I was an embarrassing mom. To myself, I was a failure. But under Richard's gaze, I started to feel a flicker of the woman I used to be. He was the sun, and I was a frozen, forgotten planet, slowly starting to thaw in his orbit. I knew it was wrong. The word stepfather would form in my mind, a sharp, jagged shape, and I would push it away. He was just a friend. He was family, in a weird modern way. He was just being kind. My mother wanted him to be kind. I was so profoundly, catastrophically lonely that I let his attention become my oxygen. The first time he touched me, it was framed as a gesture of comfort. I'd been crying over a missed custody weekend, Liam having chosen a friend's party over me. Richard had found me in the kitchen of my mother's house during a Sunday dinner, my hands shaking as I filled the kettle. He just put his hand on my shoulder, a firm, grounding pressure. But then his thumb moved, a slow, circular caress against the back of my neck. It wasn't a friendly touch. It was an electric current that shot straight down my spine. I froze, but I didn't pull away. I was so starved for touch, for any physical connection that wasn't a fleeting half-hug from my son, that my body betrayed my mind. I just stood there, letting this man, my mother's husband, draw slow, forbidden circles on my skin. It escalated, as these sordid stories always do, in tiny incremental steps, each one normalizing the one that came before. The lingering hug, the hand on the small of my back, the late-night texts that started with a funny meme and ended with him telling me I was beautiful. I found myself shaping my days around these crumbs of attention. I started dressing for him, even if it was just for a family dinner. I bought a new perfume. I was performing for an audience of one, and the worst part was, I knew I was being played. A part of my brain, the rational, intelligent, 40-year-old part, screamed from behind a soundproof glass wall that I was being groomed for a fall. But the louder part, the raw, wounded, lonely part, didn't care. The night it happened was a blur of red wine and self-pity. It was the 6-month anniversary of my divorce being finalized, a milestone I had been dreading. My mother was out of town, visiting her sister in Scottsdale. Richard, who had stayed behind for a business thing, invited himself over, saying he didn't want me to be alone. He brought a bottle of expensive Cabernet, the kind of thoughtful gesture David would never have made. We sat on my back patio, the humid summer air thick with the scent of my neighbor's gardenias. I talked and talked, the wine loosening the dam of my sorrows. I cried about my failed marriage, my fears of dying alone, the guilt of not being a good enough mother. Richard listened. He handed me tissues. He refilled my glass. He told me my ex-husband was a fool. He told me I was magnificent. And when he leaned in to kiss me, it felt, in my dizzy, wine-soaked state, like an inevitable conclusion, a mathematical certainty. This was the antidote to my pain. This was the validation I was dying for. His kiss wasn't tentative or questioning. It was hungry, possessive. I kissed him back with a desperation that terrifies me to remember. A desperation born of a void so deep inside me. I thought only a love like this, a forbidden, all-consuming fire, could ever fill it. I wasn't thinking of my mother. I had edited her out of the scene entirely. She was a supporting character who had been written out of the script. It was only about me and my need and his terrible magnetic presence. We went inside, and I made the choice. I chose to betray the woman who had held my hand in the clinic. I chose to burn my life to the ground for the fleeting warmth of a man who didn't belong to me. I slept with my mother's husband in the sad, rumpled sheets of my divorce bed. The next morning, the magic had curdled into a sick, cold horror. The morning light was not flattering to Richard. It showed the deep lines around his mouth, the slight puffiness under his eyes. He was just a man, an aging, unfaithful man. He looked at me with a lazy, satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. "Well," he'd said, stretching, "that was certainly unexpected." Unexpected. As if I were a surprise party he'd stumbled into. The shame was a physical entity, a greasy, black oil coating my skin. I felt it in my throat, in my lungs. What had I done? I had thrown a grenade into the very heart of my family. I had become a walking, breathing glitch, a cautionary tale from a daytime talk show. "You need to go," I'd whispered, my voice hoarse. "My mother, oh my God, you need to leave. This didn't happen." He just chuckled, a patronizing, ugly sound, and started getting dressed. For the next 2 weeks, I was a ghost haunting my own life. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I flinched every time my phone rang, terrified it would be my mother's name on the screen, her voice full of a knowledge that would shatter her world. I avoided Richard's calls and texts, which started as thinking of you and quickly devolved into, "You're being childish, Claire." I was spiraling, performing the most elaborate act of normal I could muster when Liam called. While inside I was a static-filled radio tuned to a single, screaming frequency of guilt. I had placed all my hopes on the mantra it was a one-time mistake, a moment of madness, and it will never, ever happen again. I was determined to bury it so deep that even I would eventually forget it was there. A little landmine in my psyche waiting for a single misplaced step. The missed period was the step. I tried to rationalize it. I was 40 after all. Stress from the divorce, the move, the guilt that was eating me alive. My cycle was probably just shifting. Perimenopause, I told myself. The word a life raft. I was too old to get pregnant. That's what they tell you. At 40, the eggs are dusty, the factory is winding down. It was statistically improbable. But after 2 weeks of waking up with a sour, metallic taste in my mouth and breasts so tender I couldn't lie on my stomach, a cold, dawning horror began to replace my hopeful denial. I bought the test from a pharmacy 3 towns over, my hands hidden in the pockets of a large hoodie, my sunglasses on even though it was an overcast day. I was a criminal buying the evidence of my own crime. And there, on the edge of the bathtub, the 2 pink lines delivered their verdict. I wasn't just an adulterer. I wasn't just a daughter who had betrayed her mother. I was pregnant. with a baby, my stepfather's baby, the life I had been trying so desperately to hold together. The public story of the amicably divorced woman starting a new chapter was not just a lie. It was a ticking time bomb. The terror that seized me was so absolute it was paralyzing. For an hour, I couldn't move. I just sat there, the test becoming a little plastic monument to my ruin. The first clear thought that cut through the panic was, I can't do this. I can't have this baby. I'm 40 years old. I'm barely holding on to my own life. I can't bring a child into this tabloid headline. My mind went back to that clinic when I was 17. The bright lights, the quiet, efficient nurses, the profound sense of relief mixed with a lifetime of sadness. I could do that again. It would be a full circle, a terrible poetic justice. I would erase this mistake with the same procedure my mother had once helped me through. Only this time, I would be completely and utterly alone. But a new voice, stronger and more treacherous, spoke next. What if this is it? My last chance? I was 40. Liam was practically grown. My body was a ticking clock that had, by some cruel miracle, started ticking backward. David and I had tried for another baby for years. I'd suffered one devastating miscarriage at 35, an event that had widened the gulf in our already faltering marriage. I'd mourned that loss as a sign that my window was closing. And now, here it was, a baby, a living, growing spark of life, conceived not in love, but in the very epicenter of my self-destruction. Was this a punishment? Or was it a twisted, heartbreaking gift? I thought of the emptiness of my bungalow. I thought of Liam, who needed me less and less with each passing day. I thought of the maternal love I still had stored up inside me, a vast, unused reservoir that had nowhere to go. This baby would be mine, a pure, innocent life that would love me unconditionally, a love that wouldn't leave for college, or move in with its father, or marry a slick, silver-haired predator. This baby was a second chance, a tiny, beating heart trying to grow in the toxic soil of my mistake. I knew, with a certainty that frightened me more than anything else, that I wanted to keep it. I would raise this child alone. I would move away, start over somewhere new, and my past would be the legend we never spoke of. A fool's plan, a fantasy built on a foundation of sand, but it was the only hope I had. The secret lasted in its pure, terrifying form for 8 weeks. I went through the motions. I started taking prenatal vitamins, hiding the bottle in my sock drawer. I went to a free clinic, alone, and had a sonogram where I saw a tiny, flickering heartbeat on the monitor, a silent pulse of life that felt like a promise. I named it, in my head, Poppy. I didn't know why. The name just bloomed there. I started looking at studio apartments online, in towns near the coast, where no one knew the name Brenda or Richard. I was building a fragile, secret future for myself and Poppy, brick by stolen brick. But I couldn't hide the physical reality. The morning sickness hit me with a vengeance. It was nothing like my pregnancy with Liam, a mere queasiness that was cured with a few saltines. This was a full-body rebellion, a violent, hourly purge that left me trembling and hollow. I couldn't keep the secret any longer. I had to tell Richard. He had a right to know, even if the thought of his involvement filled me with dread. I was still terrified of my mother, but I naively believed Richard and I could handle this as a dark, private pact. We had made this mess. We could figure out a way to contain it. I asked him to meet me at a diner, a greasy spoon on the other side of town. It was the kind of place where the coffee is bottomless and the waitresses don't look you in the eye. Neutral ground. When I told him, his reaction was not what I expected. I had braced for horror, for panic, for denial. Instead, his face went completely still. Then, a slow, reptilian smile spread across his lips. A baby, he said, and the word didn't sound like a disaster. It sounded like a triumph. My baby, a possessive, gloating light entered his eyes that made my blood run cold. This wasn't a shared problem to be solved. To Richard, this was a trophy. I was the vessel of his virility, the ultimate proof of his conquest of both mother and daughter. I'll take care of it, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You, me, the baby, will be a real family. I'm done with Brandy anyway. This is just the push I needed. He was already writing the script. A script that cast me as his new leading lady and my mother as the discarded first draft. The horror I had felt before was replaced with a new, starker terror. I hadn't just slept with a cheater. I was tethered to a narcissist who saw my pregnancy as a weapon. I stuttered out my plan to leave, to raise it alone. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard fury. "That's my child, Claire. You won't go anywhere without me. You don't get to make that decision." He had me, and he knew it. The secret was a noose around my neck, and he was holding the other end of the rope. I left the diner in a state of pure, unadulterated panic. The fragile fantasy I'd built of Poppy and me by the sea was shattered, replaced by a horrifying vision of a future where I was trapped with Richard forever. A trophy wife to a sociopath, my mother destroyed, my son ashamed beyond recovery. After 2 more days of panic attacks and sleepless nights, I realized I was out of options. I couldn't run. Richard would find me. He had the resources and the terrifying will. I had to take back control of the narrative. The only way out was through. I had to tell my mother. I had to come clean, on my own terms, before Richard could twist a story to his own advantage. It was the most terrifying decision of my life. Walking into the clinic at 17 was a walk in the park compared to this. I was going to dismantle my mother's world with my own words, not just with a betrayal, but with a living, growing consequence. I knew it would be awful. I knew there would be rage and tears and a terrible, wounded silence. But some tiny, naive part of me, the daughter who remembered the soup and the hair stroking, and the "we all make mistakes," believed that a mother's love was unconditional. I believed that after the storm, we would find a new, scarred shore together. She would, in time, still be my mother. She would be furious, heartbroken, disgusted, but she would still be my mother, wouldn't she? I chose a Sunday evening, the same kind of Sunday evening that had been the backdrop of my childhood. A time of roast chicken and homework and the quiet hum of family. The beautiful, sprawling house where I grew up now felt like a stage set for my execution. My heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs as I walked up the flagstone path. The smell of lavender from my mother's perfectly manicured garden made me feel nauseous. It was the scent of her, of order and beauty and a life I was about to obliterate. She had invited me for dinner. Just the 3 of us, she'd said. A nice, quiet family meal. I sat on her chintz sofa, a piece of furniture I'd known my whole life. Its floral pattern a symbol of a permanent, unchanging domesticity. The teacup she handed me rattled in its saucer. My hands were shaking so violently. Richard was in his armchair, feigning an air of relaxed ignorance, but I could feel the tension radiating off him like a coiled spring. He knew what I was about to do. "Mom," I began, my voice a dry whisper, "I need to tell you something. Something terrible." She sat down across from me, her own cup of Earl Grey steaming gently. Her face, still so beautiful, was creased with immediate concern. "Claire, darling, you look ashen. What on earth is the matter? Is it Liam? Is he okay?" "Liam's fine," I choked out. "It's me, Mom. I'm pregnant." For a split second, a flicker of pure, unadulterated joy crossed her face. "Pregnant?" she breathed, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, my darling girl, a baby." I know it's a shock, but a new life is always a blessing. Who is the father? Is it someone new you've been seeing?" This was it, the point of no return. I looked at Richard. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. I looked back at my mother, at the hopeful, innocent light in her eyes, the light I was about to extinguish forever. "It's Richard, Mom," I said, the words dropping into the quiet room like stones into a still pond. "Richard is the father." The silence that followed was not just an absence of sound. It was a living thing, a monstrous, suffocating presence that sucked all the air from the room. My mother didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared at me, the teacup suspended halfway to her lips. The joyful expression on her face didn't so much fall away as it was violently erased, replaced by a blank, uncomprehending canvas. She was a statue, frozen in the moment before a cataclysmic shattering. I could see the sentence landing, over and over, in her mind. "It's Richard. Richard is the father." The words were connecting, forming a picture that was too abhorrent to process. Her eyes, wide and glassy, slowly so slowly, shifted to Richard. He, the coward, the predator who had orchestrated half of this, suddenly snapped into an act of high moral outrage. "Brenda, my God," he spluttered, rising to his feet and pacing. "She's lying. She's unwell. I told you she's been unhinged since the divorce. She's been coming on to me for months, and I didn't want to tell you. She's obsessed with me. And now she's trying to destroy us with this insane fantasy." His words were a physical blow. The air was driven from my lungs. I had expected him to squirm, to deflect, but I hadn't expected this masterclass in gaslighting. "That's not true," I screamed, my voice cracking with rage and terror. "Mom, look at me. I'm telling you the truth. We slept together once, at my house, when you were in Scottsdale. It was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. But this baby is his." My mother's teacup finally began to tilt, a slow-motion catastrophe. A wave of pale brown tea spilled onto her cream-colored carpet, a stain spreading like a dark, ugly flower. She didn't notice. She rose from her chair, and the movement was not her own. It was jerky, mechanical, as if she were a marionette controlled by a novice puppeteer. Her face was no longer blank. It was a landscape of pure, raw, primal pain. It was a look of such profound betrayal that it made Richard's lies seem like a minor offense. I was the one who had put that look there. "You," she whispered, her voice no longer her own. It was a rusted, unused thing. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing the daughter she'd held and comforted. She was seeing a stranger, a monster, a rival. "You, with my husband?" "It was a one-time mistake," I sobbed, my words stumbling over each other. "I was so lost, so lonely. Please, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know it's unforgivable. But the baby is innocent." Richard kept up his tirade in the background, a soundtrack of self-serving venom, calling me manipulative, a liar, a troubled woman who needed help. But my mother wasn't listening to him. Her entire being was focused on me. The world had collapsed for her, and it was my face that was pinned to the wreckage. "In my house," she breathed, her voice gaining a terrifying strength. "You drank my wine. You ate my food. You smiled to my face. And you slithered into my bed." Her words were not a shout. They were a low, vibrating hiss, a sound more frightening than any scream. "You, my daughter, I gave you everything. I stood by you through your mess of a divorce. I paid the deposit on your house. I held your hand when you were 17, when you were just a scared little girl making a mistake. This isn't a mistake. This is a calculated, vicious act of war." "No, Mom, no. It wasn't like that," I pleaded, getting up and trying to move towards her. She flinched back as if I had raised a hand to strike her. The flinch was a knife to my gut. "Don't you dare come near me," she seethed. "Don't you touch me. You are a poison. You have envied my happiness from the start. You couldn't stand that I had moved on, that I had found joy after your father died. You had to destroy it. You had to take it for yourself." The accusations were so wildly off the mark, yet so perfectly constructed from her perspective, that I had no defense. How could I explain the complex, pathetic cocktail of loneliness and vulnerability without sounding like I was making excuses? In the face of her monolithic pain, my reasons were dust. Richard, sensing the narrative was swinging in his favor, put a possessive, comforting arm around my mother's shoulders. She leaned into him, clinging to the fiction he was offering her because the truth was too devastating to bear. He was offering her a world where she was a victim, and her husband was a loyal, misunderstood man. I was the sole architect of evil. She chose to live in his lie. She chose him. "I want you out of that house," she said, her voice now a cold, flat, business-like monotone, which was somehow even worse. "The bungalow. It's in my name. I want you out by the end of the week." "Mom, I don't have anywhere to go. I'm pregnant." The word pregnant made her flinch again, a violent, bodily shudder. "That," she spat, her eyes dropping to my stomach for the first time. And what I saw there was not love, was not even pity. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. "That is an abomination. a bastard child conceived in sin and deceit. You will not speak of it to me. You are no longer my daughter. The ground opened up beneath me. This wasn't a storm we could weather. This was a total, unconditional amputation. The fortress of a mother's love I had believed in my entire life had just slammed its gates shut, leaving me on the outside, wounded and bleeding and carrying a secret the world would see as a monster. You can't mean that, I whispered, the tears blinding me. Please, you're my mother. A mother? She laughed, a hollow, brittle, terrifying sound. I am no longer your mother. You killed that woman tonight. Now, get out of my house. I never want to see your face again. And you can bet I'll be calling Liam. I'll make sure he knows exactly what his mother is. The mention of Liam was the final killing stroke. She was going to poison my son against me. She was going to use my own child as the ultimate weapon. That was the moment I knew the woman I'd loved, the woman who had made me soup, was truly gone. In her place was a grievously wounded animal. And a wounded animal is the most dangerous of all. She was going to tear me to pieces, and she was going to make sure I had nothing and no one left. I remember the walk out of that house as a series of disconnected sensory flashes. The heavy thud of the solid oak front door closing behind me. The insane, cheerful chirping of crickets in the summer night. The scent of lavender, which would now be the smell of death to me forever. And the feeling of being completely, cosmically untethered. I was no longer a daughter. Would I soon be no longer a mother to Liam? My identity, which had already been fractured by divorce, had just been shattered into a million microscopic pieces. I drove back to my bungalow, the rental that was no longer a purgatory but an eviction notice, in a state of shock. It was a warm night, but I was freezing, my body racked with violent, uncontrollable shivers. I crawled into my bed, fully clothed, and curled into a fetal position, my hands wrapped protectively around the tiny spark that was Poppy. It was just the two of us now, barricaded in a world that had rejected us before we'd even had a chance. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological destruction. My mother, a woman of formidable organizational skills and deep community ties, declared war. She didn't just evict me, she annihilated me. I was officially served an eviction notice, taped to my door on a crisp white, legal-sized sheet of paper. She blocked my number, so I couldn't even leave a voicemail of apology that would rot unheard. But the campaign was much more insidious than logistics. She went to work on our entire shared world. First came the calls from her friends, women who had known me since I was in pigtails. They were checking in, their voices thick with a false, cloying sympathy that barely masked a voracious, vicarious hunger for the scandal. Claire, darling, what on earth happened? Your mother is in pieces. She's saying the most unimaginable things. They didn't want my side of the story. They wanted to taste my shame, to roll it around on their tongues like a fine wine. Before reporting back to my mother, I became a ghost in their world, a cautionary tale they would whisper at book clubs and garden parties. But the worst, the absolute, soul-crushing worst, was Liam. My mother, in her righteous fury, had been true to her word. She called him. She summoned my 15-year-old son to her perfect house, and she told him, in a version edited for maximum maternal destruction, that his mother had seduced his new step-grandfather and was pregnant with his child. The phone call I received from him 2 days after being evicted from the family was a death sentence. Mom, his voice was strange, tight. He wasn't sullen. He was something else. Something worse. Liam, baby, hi, I said, a pathetic, desperate hope leaping in my chest. I've been so worried. Look, I know Grandma talked to you, and there's so much I need to explain. It's not what you think. Is it true? He cut me off. His voice had a new, hard edge I'd never heard before. Are you pregnant with Richard's baby? The silence on my end was all the confirmation he needed. Oh my God, Mom. The words were drenched in a disgust so profound it was a physical thing. It was the same revulsion I'd seen in my mother's eyes. That's so sick. That's so gross. He's like 60, and he's married to Grandma. What is wrong with you? All my friends. What am I supposed to tell them? My mom is a homewrecker who's having a kid with her own stepdad. Liam, please, I begged, the tears already streaming. It's complicated. I was in a really bad place. It was a one-time thing. A terrible mistake. I love you. You're my son. This doesn't change that. It changes everything. He yelled into the phone. I'm not coming to see you this weekend. I'm not coming to see you ever. I don't even know who you are. You ruined Grandma's life. You ruined everything. I can't even look at you. The line went dead. He hung up on me. My boy, my little boy, the one I'd carried and nursed and taught to ride a bike, had just recoiled from me as if I were a contagious disease. My mother had taken him. She had taken my son. The one good, pure thing I had left from my marriage was now gone, poisoned against me by the woman who was supposed to protect us both. I howled. I lay on the floor of my soon-to-be former home and I howled like a wounded animal, my screams muffled by the cheap beige carpet. The pain wasn't emotional. It was cellular. It was a burning, tearing agony in every atom of my being. I had lost my mother. I had lost my son. I was losing my home. And inside me, the tiny, innocent cause of all this destruction, Poppy, continued her silent,